Is a green wave about to wash over Canada ahead of the next federal election? Can the party led by Elizabeth May turn warm and fuzzy feelings into votes and seats in the House of Commons? Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. A new Abacus Data poll shows the federal Greens with 12% support. Heady days for the party that's tried to crack double-digit support forever in Canada. Digging deeper in those numbers, more than one-third of voters say they would consider voting Green. It appears young Canadians are fueling the fire of support, with almost 6 in 10 under 30s kicking the tires. And it's not the first time the Greens were seen to be on the cusp of a breakthrough, but always seems stymied by strategic voting. And is this any different? There's still plenty of racetrack before we go to the polls, but it's certainly wind in the sails of the Green Party's morale. Today on the Unpublished Cafe, we'll take a look at what it will take for the Greens to turn the corner. At the provincial level, the Greens have seen victories, electing their first MPP to the Ontario legislature. The Green Party is the official opposition in P.E.I, and it holds the balance of power in BC. Joining us later in the show will be Paul Manley, the second ever Green Party MP in the House of Commons after winning the by-election in Nanaimo Ladysmith. To get an overview of the issue and whether the Greens can make it reality, I am pleased to be joined by Nelson Wiseman, professor of political science at the University of Toronto. And Nelson, did the numbers in this Abacus survey surprise you, or have you seen this before?
They don't surprise me. They're a little higher than some other polls. If we go to the CBC's poll tracker, they've got the Greens, I think, just over 10%. But I discount a lot of polls taken at this point because, as you pointed out, Ed, a lot of people vote strategically. So when they're answering a question long before an election in an abstract way, they'll say, oh, yeah, I like the Greens. But when push comes to shove and they realize that that party is not going to win, then they start thinking, well, and it seems only a liberal or conservative can win in their riding, then they end up making a strategic choice, thinking, okay, well, which would be better? This is what hurt the NDP in the last election, and it's hurt the Greens in all of the elections. In fact, one of my observations is this. If you go back to past elections and look at polls 6 months or a year before the election, the Greens are always higher than they actually end up performing in the election. I think that'll happen again this time, although there are a lot of unpredictables. Much will have to do with what kind of profile Elizabeth May gets during the actual campaign period, whether she gets the same time in a TV debate, for example, as the other leaders. If she does, that's incredible upside potential, because in that type of format, everyone is equal. Everyone gets equal time. But if she's blocked out of the debates, then it's as if they're not in the race. So that has a great influence. And we just don't know how that's going to play out.
Now, would you say that strategic voting has pretty well been the Achilles heel of the Green Party? It doesn't seem it's the other political parties that they're opposition. It's getting people to commit to the Greens.
Yeah, it's been their Achilles heel, and I think also the NDP's, with the exception of 2011. 2011 is the only time in history since the NDP's predecessor was formed, the CCF in 1932, that the NDP got the same percentage of seats, slightly more, than its percentage of the vote. So, but I do see upside potential for the Greens. I think they're going to hold on to their 2 seats. I think they can win Victoria. And I think they might win some other seat on the West Coast. I don't see them doing anything outside of British Columbia. And you mentioned Prince Edward Island. I think they're going to have a hard time getting 10-15% of the vote in any of those 4 ridings. But I'm wrong most of the time.
Nelson Wiseman's joining us from the University of Toronto as we talk about the Green Party, the federal Green Party, and some rosy numbers from an Abacus Data survey for them cracking about 12% support. And when we look at a situation for the Green Party, and breaking back demographics here, it looks most of young Canadians are really taking a look at the Green Party. What does that tell you? People are engaged, or they're just kind of curious?
Well, let's remember, young people are the least likely to vote in elections. Their numbers went up in the last election because of Justin Trudeau, his more youthful image than the other leaders, his proposal to legalize marijuana. But I expect voter turnout this time will be down, and I think it'll be down for young people, maybe more than for other cohorts of the population. The group that's more, the older people are, except when you get beyond the 80s, the more likely people are to vote. So the polls may not be a good reflection of how people will actually vote. I mean, let's remember, last time we had exceptionally high turnout. It was 68%. We hadn't had that in, I don't know, maybe 3 decades or so. We may only get a 60% turnout this time. And if that's the case, among young people, it's going to be less than 50%.
The Green Party, we had mentioned making more noise in provincial politics across Canada. We've got Mike Schreiner is the first Ontario MPP Green Party member. We've, as mentioned, P.E.I, the opposition in BC. They hold a balance of power. How much is that sort of putting the Green Party on the big stage for voters to look at?
Well, it has. It has. I mean, they got a lot of attention because of P.E.I, although P.E.I is a very, very, very small jurisdiction. It'll only have 4 seats out of 338 in the House of Commons. British Columbia is a rather separate case because that's where there's the greatest environmental consciousness, especially right on the coast. And both Nanaimo and Saanich Gulf Islands, which Elizabeth May represents, both are on tidewater. So that's different. Yes, the Greens made a breakthrough in Ontario. They have 1 seat. They've been cultivating that constituency, I think, for about 20 years. They made a strategic choice to just go and concentrate on the riding where they've done the best, which is how Elizabeth May got elected, because she originally ran in Nova Scotia and got blown out of the water. But I looked up the polls for Ontario earlier today, and what struck me was how low support for the Green Party was. I don't remember exactly, but it was around 4%. So, I certainly don't see that translating into the federal level. I mean, maybe they'll get 4, 5, 6% in Ontario, but I'm skeptical. I think the Greens are going to do best in British Columbia, both in popular vote and in seats that, if they win, in seats they win. In fact, they hold 2 now. I said I think they can win 4, and they'll all be in British Columbia. So it could be, and this wouldn't be a defeat for them, because the more seats they get in the House of Commons, the more legitimacy it gives them in the eyes of the public. And with respect to Prince Edward Island, you may have a phenomenon like you had in New Brunswick 30 years ago, where out of the blue, all of a sudden, the Confederation of Regents Party was the official opposition. In the following election, they weren't there anymore. Mind you, they were largely disaffected conservatives. Prince Edward Island is interesting, though, because it has a very traditional political culture, and this is showing how it's becoming modernized in its politics. So there are probably very peculiar, particular, local issues that drive the vote in Prince Edward Island, where people are much more likely to know each other.
It seems the rise in support, according to some of the numbers for the Green Party, is coming at the expense of the Liberals. Is this something the Liberals should be concerned about?
Yes, the Liberals, and I think especially the NDP, because those, the NDP isn't going to form the government. I think it's going to lose seats in this coming election because I don't see it winning any seats in Quebec. But yes, of course, the Liberals are going to lose, because if you're one of these young people or another person who's a Greenie, who wants to support the Greens, who really care, who thinks they're the only ones that are really committed on environment, and then you look around and realize, well, they're not going to win in your constituency. When you shop around, you say, okay, well, then there's the NDP, which has quite a progressive policy on climate change. Yeah, but they're not going to win in my constituency either. So that leaves the Liberals and Conservatives. And the Conservatives, based on their record and their platform, haven't offered that much on the environmental issues. So, of course, that's going to hurt the... then you end up going back to the Liberals. So, yes, Green support has taken away from the Liberals, but that's the kind of support, and it has in past polls as well before other elections. And those people, a lot of them, go back to the Liberals. And I come back to one of my first points is, in every election that the Greens have been running since they started, the final percentage that they get in the election is never as high as their percentage in the polls. But if they drop from 10 or 12% to 8%, that's a gigantic leap. I mean, I think they had 4 or 5% in the last election.
Yeah. Nelson, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Nelson Wiseman is director of the Canadian Studies program, as well as professor of political science at the University of Toronto. It's been a month since the federal Green Party made headlines and history by getting its second MP elected to the House of Commons. Paul Manley won the by-election in Nanaimo Ladysmith, doubling Green Party representation in the House. Green Party leader Elizabeth May was the first Green MP. To find out more about the victory and what it means heading into the next federal election, I am pleased to be joined by Paul Manley. And first off, Paul, congratulations on the win.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, your political roots were with the NDP. Why the change to Green?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a long story, but it dates back, I guess, to 2012 when my dad was on a boat to Gaza, and I was the family member at home that supported him when he was seized in international waters and taken to an Israeli detention center and held incommunicado for 5 days. And at the time, I tried to get somebody to speak up for my dad, and my own MP wasn't able to. She couldn't speak for my father. Told me she wasn't allowed to. So then I was told to speak to the foreign affairs critic, who ignored me for several days. And I wrote a letter to the NDP caucus and asked them why they were ignoring an elder statesman in the party, and nobody would speak up for him. And I said that Tommy Douglas, in that letter, I said Tommy Douglas would have stood up for my dad. And I knew Tommy. I campaigned with Tommy on my 16th birthday. I campaigned with him a bunch, but I spent my 16th birthday with him getting my dad elected. And he didn't always do what was popular, but he did what was right. And that letter that I wrote to the NDP caucus was leaked to the media, and the next day I got a call from Peter O'Neill and the Vancouver Sun and Ottawa Citizen, and he asked me if that was my letter, and I said, yeah. He asked me if I was disappointed with the NDP not speaking out for my father, and I said yes. And asked me what my comments about Tommy Douglas, and I said, yeah, that's how I feel. So years later, when I stepped up for the nomination, that was the reason why they wouldn't let me run, because I was critical of the NDP, because I defended what my father's actions were. He was on a boat to Gaza with members of parliament from around the world, but mostly Europe, and Jewish members of parliament from Europe, and Israelis who had been part of the Defense Force, and they were on a peace mission to break the blockade of Gaza. So Tom Mulcair would have nothing to do with me.
So it's 7 years later.
Yeah, so and Elizabeth May called me to talk to me, and I've known Elizabeth since 1999. And I told her I wouldn't run Green, and she asked me several more times. And then I read Vision Green. And I took the Green train across Canada. I got hired to do that, to document that trip and got to know a lot more about Green Party policy. And I was actually very impressed with the breadth and scope of Green Party policy. It's much more in depth than the NDP policy book. And so, yeah, I eventually hopped in and ran in 2015. Tripled the Green Party vote in Nanaimo. At that point, we had the closest four-way race in Canada, but couldn't win based on the Trudeau wave and the fear of the Harper re-election. So I wasn't sure I was going to run again in 2019, but shortly after the 2015 election, I found out I was going to be a grandfather, and just really felt the need to step up and work on defending the next generation. We're leaving a huge burden to our children and grandchildren, and climate change is a big part of that. And so, yeah, I decided to run again, and I won in this by-election.
Paul, it seems it's the party that made you change by not speaking up for your father and wouldn't speak to you. Is the way the Green Party is run different than the way those other three parties are being run?
Yeah, I had a commitment in 2015 that I wouldn't be whipped, that I wouldn't be told how to vote or what to say, and that I was basically an independent member of parliament, or I would be an independent member of parliament. The key thing was that I had to agree to the Green Party policy book, and any parts of the policy book that I disagreed with, I had to be upfront and honest about what parts I disagreed with. And then if I have a disagreement with Elizabeth on a policy issue, I just need to be straight with her about what that is and have that conversation. And then I'm free to discuss that openly. But I don't have to go and ask Elizabeth if it's okay if I speak about a local issue that's got federal implications. So, I'm or to speak on behalf of a local constituent. There's much more latitude and trust for MPs to do their job.
When you were on the campaign trail in the last by-election, what were you hearing at the door?
Well, lots of really positive support for me. I'm well known in the community. I've done a lot of work for local nonprofits and First Nations, and I'm a filmmaker, but I do a lot of service work, and I've been active in the community, in the local food movement and the labor community, social justice, the environment, obviously. And so I've been working on projects and doing things in this community that people appreciate. And I think people were looking for a change. A lot of people are concerned about climate change. We've got here on Vancouver Island, we had some very, very strong windstorms back in December that knocked a lot of the power out in our communities, but left trees down all over the place and have left debris all over the forest floor. We have had years of drought now. We are right now in a drought situation. We had in March water levels that we can expect in our lakes and rivers at August. And so we went into water restrictions at the beginning of May, and we're going into level 3 water restrictions on the island right now, and we have cedars and fir trees dying in our forests. And last summer we were just surrounded by smoke from forest fires in the interior, and it was creating problems for people's health. And so there was a spike in healthcare visits because of how it was affecting people's respiratory situation. Insurance rates have gone up during, because of the fires, and it's really hard on our tourism industry. It's hard on our forest industry. So people are seeing the effects of climate change and understanding that this is a serious issue. And we also have an affordability crisis in Nanaimo. So affordable housing is a real problem now, and that's because house prices over in Vancouver spiked, as many people know, over the last 15 years. It's just gone up and up and up. And so a lot of affordability refugees started buying in the Nanaimo area, but we've had money laundering and speculation in our market, and so that's starting to happen here, I guess, and prices, houses were selling, uh, flipping, and then the prices were going up. People were renovating houses and evicting tenants, and then those tenants had to go find somewhere to live, and the cost of living had gone way up, and so people who are our most vulnerable members of our communities, seniors with fixed incomes, people with disabilities, single parent families, were all having a real hard time finding affordable places to live. And we had a huge homeless camp in our community last year, and that camp was just really some of the hardest to house folks. There was like up to 300 people in it, but there was small camps all around the community. We had an increase in some criminality based on people living, in survival mode. And then we had the Soldiers of Odin come marching into town a couple of times, threatening vigilante action against homeless people. And so things kind of came to a crescendo last year, and we have now a couple of emergency shelter setups, but that doesn't help those people that weren't in that camp. And so we have people sleeping in their cars and sleeping in the woods and all over the community. And so that's another issue that people are really concerned about here. It's Nanaimo's been a working class town for a long, long time, and all of a sudden that's all changing.
Paul Manley is joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. He won the by-election in Nanaimo Ladysmith, becoming the second Green Party MP in the House of Commons. And Paul, the one thing I've always found about the Green Party is usually anywhere from 6 months to a year before the election is probably when they have the most wind in their sails. But that dreaded strategic voting always seems to come back in the end and bring them down. How does the Green Party this time around beat strategic voting?
Yeah, strategic voting. I think people have heard that line over and over and over again, and then been disappointed by what they get over and over and over again. I mean, I think the strategic vote went to the Liberals last time, and what did we get? We got a promise where the Prime Minister said 1,500 times that 2015 would be the last first past the post election, and here we are. We're going into 2019 with the first past the post election. We had a Prime Minister who said that only communities can provide permission, and that we needed to change the NEB process for projects like pipelines, and then they went and bought a pipeline. People are getting tired of being bamboozled by politicians, and I think that we're not seeing the definition of insanity playing out in this country over and over and over again when we go back and forth since Confederation between the Conservatives and the Liberals. It's time for something different, and I think that that's a lot of what I heard at the doorstep too. Is that people really wanted change. They wanted something different. They wanted a politician that they knew was going to be able to speak for their constituents and not get whipped and told what to do by their leader. Because more and more we're starting to realize that that's how the system works. And I think the Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott situation showed us that, but we've also seen that same situation with the Conservatives, where the Conservatives were all whipped to pretend that asbestos was safe, and so they vote to say that asbestos is safe and vote against those things that they've said that they were running against. And the largest debts and deficits are run up by Conservatives in this country, and they're the ones that are always beating the drum about reducing the debt and reducing the deficit, and yet they're the ones that give us the largest deficits and the largest debts. And a lot of people are waking up to that. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to hear the strategic vote again, but people need to just stop and think about what it is that they want and vote for what they want. And our system sucks, actually, quite honestly. The way this first past the post system works, it doesn't work for people, and it doesn't help our electoral system. I'm really disappointed with the Liberals. I mean, they had a mandate. They had a mandate to change the electoral system. They didn't need to run through a referendum or anything else. That promise was repeated so much that they could have just gone ahead and changed to a proportional system, and nobody would have argued with it.
I think it was repeated. I think it was repeated more than you ever heard about legalization of marijuana, because I don't recall that ever being a big issue till later in the debates.
Yeah.
It was more a distraction.
Yeah. Well, it was a way of siphoning off votes. You know, like, don't worry, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure. Don't worry about the vote splitting. Just bring us in, and we'll handle it. Yeah. So,
Paul, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Paul Manley is the second ever Green Party MP in the House of Commons. He represents the BC riding of Nanaimo-Ladysmith. And that leads to our poll question for Unpublished.Vote. Why do you think there's been a rise in support for the Green Party in Canada? And here are your options: climate change, voter dissatisfaction, Green Party leader Elizabeth May, evidence-based decision-making, or other. And you can add your comments to that. We'd love to hear from you at Unpublished.Vote. You can log on and vote right now and make your voice heard. Unpublished.Vote. I want to thank you for joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand.